Hey everybody, back from Eastwood. We're here in the Eastwood garage doing another live tech session for you guys on Wednesday. If anybody that's watching has not before, we try and keep these pretty interactive, so we have a chat set up that you can join whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. As usual, we have Scott over here on the chat.
Hey everybody. So yep, as Matt said, Facebook and YouTube, you guys can comment on the video, like it, share it if you have anyone that you know could benefit from this video. But also don't feel free to ask questions. We can answer them live right here in the video. So let's see what's going on today, Matt.
Cool. So yeah, as Scott mentioned, we're going to be taking questions. So if you guys have welding questions, we're covering filling trim holes. So earlier today we were shooting a video that's a nice polished longer form video showing the different ways that you can fill holes in a panel, whether it's you drilled out some spot welds and you want to plug weld them back up, or if you're just filling in trim holes or something like that, or if you're doing custom work or something where you're trying to shave an area or fill in an area, this is how you do that. So I'm going to show you guys a couple quick tips with that. We're going to do a little bit of welding and show you a couple different ways to do it. So I'm going to show you first with the MIG welder. So I have our MIG 135 set up over here. This is our 110 unit that works really well for sheet metal to medium duty fabrication. This thing's again 110, and I have 023 wires set up in here. It's probably hard to see for a little more. There we go. So I have 023 wires set up in here. A lot of times when you're doing heavier fabrication, you're going to use 030 or 035. But we have 023 set up in here for sheet metal work. The fender that we're working on today is 20 gauge, so it is pretty light. It's what you're going to see on a lot of more modern vehicles. And we're going to show you a couple techniques with this. So we have a few really handy tools that make filling holes a lot easier in a panel. This is a fender where there was a fender cover over here, a wheel arch that was over this, a plastic cover, and that flare had studs in it that mounted it into the fender. We took that off. We want to actually fill these in and make it smooth, so it has a smoother look to it when it's done. So there's a bunch of about 1/8-inch holes that are drilled in this. So we sell a couple of things. The hardest part when especially doing this 20 gauge, it's real thin because when it's drilled, it wants to blow out. So what you want to use is, we're on you, Joe?
We're on me.
Okay, cool. So we have a bunch of different, set that one there, copper backers. So depending on what you're doing, this style here has magnets that are actually implanted in the copper backer. It comes in 3 different sizes. You can buy it in a kit. And these are nice because you can just drop them on, and if you can't get into the access the panel on the back side, we can put it up underneath. It's going to hang with no problem at all, which is really nice to get up in there areas that you can't access. Now if it's an area you can access really easily, we have this style with the handle, and there's a couple different shapes and sizes that come with the kit to fit on this. So what this does is allows you to put, especially it's handy when you're MIG welding, you can put one in and you can get in here and you can MIG weld right in that hole like that by holding the copper backer behind it, and you just pick one that fits the shape you need. You can also offset it depending on what you're doing with no problem at all. So that's that one. Now the other one we have that's really handy, if you're working on a panel like this that has some curvature to where you're actually filling holes, like so for here for instance, we're actually in a curve where the hole was drilled. So this has a magnet that's built on the back side here. Has a little thumb screw for adjustment, and then it's got our little copper backer. So I'm going to flip this over so you can see what's actually going on here. So let's see. How about I stand this up for you a little better, Joe? How's that, Joe?
Better, man.
Better. Okay. So this one right in here, we have our copper backer we're going to put over top, and then the magnet goes right next to it. So this can adjust depending on the shape of the panel. So because we have a slight curvature in this way, we're going to want to tighten this screw down until it basically gets tight on the back side of the panel, and I can feel some tension, and now that's nice and tight there like so. And because it's magnetic, it's going to actually stay on, and it's going to match that curvature there because you have that thumb screw that's going to adjust it. So on this side, we now have backing up the hole on the panel right here with the copper backer. And I don't know, Joe, if you want to try and get in there to show that. Might be tough, but. So we have a couple here that are unfilled. This one, actually, the magnet's sitting over top of it. But this hole here, I'll slide it to the side so you can see. So that's the open hole. What happens is when you try to weld that, your wire's going to go all the way through, or you're going to hit the edges of the piece of the hole, and it's going to want to burn away and create a bigger hole. So we can slide the copper backer underneath of there, like so. So now when you go to weld down into the center, it's going to make a connection because it's attached to the panel. It's going to allow you to start an arc, and it's going to start welding in the hole and fill it up, but it's not going to allow the wire to fall through. So this gives you a little bit of an extra chance here, so you're not blowing a bigger hole in the panel. If you set your welder up right and you get your timing just right, a lot of times you can fill that right in one shot. Sometimes you might zap it and you get maybe just a little area where you have to do a quick zap on the corner or something to fill it in. But with doing the copper backer, it's going to almost always guarantee, as long as you get your technique down, that you're not going to blow a big giant hole in it and cause an issue, to fill a larger hole while you're going. So I'm going to weld this one with the 135. I already have it set up here. And the other thing is, I've mentioned in other videos, but make sure you clip off the end of your wire here, because a lot of times there's a little ball that's on the welder, that's on the wire, and you don't want that on there because it's going to create extra resistance when you're welding, and it's actually not going to give you the right weld on there. So pull that a little closer. I'm going to get over top of the panel here. Let's make sure we got the right ground for the right machine here. There we go. Like I said, there was a little corner. I just hit it real quick, and then I zapped it once, and that got the hole filled. I'll show so you guys can see. So here's the nice thing with that copper backer. You can see that I filled the hole, got a pretty flat little plug weld there. Now I can just pull that copper backer off. The weld does not stick to that, which is really, really handy. So you can move this along. It's not going to stick to the copper backer, and you're not going to have any issues because it gives you that split second where it actually bounces off of the copper backer and fills it up. So now we can grind that flat and work it from there. So that's one way you can do that. Using the copper backers, it's the same process. You just got to find the one that fits best for the area you're working. So some of these might be a little better in different instances, but it's good to have all these. They're cheap enough you can have them all in your toolbox, and that way you can kind of dig through just like you would a socket or a wrench. You find the one that fits best for the job and use it from there. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it that's kind of handy if you guys are into doing the TIG welding thing and you want a little bit less grinding and you want to finish it a little nicer. Another way you can do it is to do it with your TIG welder. So I'm going to show you guys quickly, kind of quick process I've used for filling holes with the TIG welder. Make sure I get all my MIG stuff out of the way here. Any questions, Scott, while I'm setting up here?
There's two of them that are going to be good ones.
Sure.
Starting off, the first one is going to be microphone. Ooh, that would be good. Yeah, microphone will be helpful so you guys can actually hear me. So the first one is they're asking if you're going to use that copper backer with the TIG welder or only the MIG. Oh,
okay. Yeah, that is a good question. I do use the. I'm going to use that copper backer for doing the TIG welding, but it's actually more for holding the little piece that I'm going to drop in there. So with TIG welding, it's a little more difficult, and it's not really as good to try and fill a big hole like that without using some kind of patch, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So more what I use this tool for is I'm actually going to use that to hold our little piece in place that I'm going to put in there. So the TIG welder, if you try and weld on the copper backer, what's going to happen is because it's probably not going to be really clean, it's going to create some contaminants are going to get in the weld when you go to strike an arc on it, and it's going to turn into a mess when you try to do that. So I wouldn't try and do the same process as we just did, where we're just filling it with wire. The MIG, it seems to work better. It's not as fussy with really clean metal, whereas the TIG, it's going to actually start spitting and sputtering because of the contaminants in the copper. So I would not just go straight to that, but we will be using it. And you said you had another one?
Yeah, what was the other one I was going to read over? Oh, that's an important one too. When you first start the weld, where do you aim at?
Ah, good. So there's a couple schools of thought of this. If I have a larger hole when I'm plug welding, I will kind of start on an edge and work my way around. With this one, what I'm actually using is the copper backer is kind of what I'm aiming for. If you aim for the edge, sometimes, especially on this 20 gauge, it might blow it away instantly as soon as you start to weld on it. So you kind of aim right off of the edge onto the copper backer, and what's going to happen is it's going to start the weld, and as soon as you get that weld going, you can either move your hand around or you can just watch it and it'll fill up the hole and you let off really quick. But if you try and aim right on the edge of that piece, because it's been drilled and it's an edge, it's going to want to blow away really quick. So I kind of aim and use the copper backer to kind of start my arc almost, and then fill it from there. But you just got to practice, get a scrap piece, see what works best for you, because that's technique, what you like. Any other ones?
We can try to catch you off guard. You said you're using the 023 wire?
Yes.
What's the metric equivalent of 023?
0.6.
Look at that.
Dang, look at that. Don't ask me anything else, I might not know. All right, so yes, so TIG welding. So we're going to show you the process for TIG welding. Talking about wire size, I have 035 TIG wire is what I use for sheet metal. So I have some 035 wire here. We're using the TIG 200 digital. The TIG 200 AC/DC machine that we have can do this just the same. I really love this machine, so I always reach for this when I can to use this machine. So actually, you know what? We'll show you prepping this first before I have to talk over this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to this panel here. And this is something that a lot of people don't like to do. We're going to take this hole. Where's my gloves at? We're going to take this hole and we're going to make a bigger hole. We're going to make it more of a mess, or so it may seem. So again, this was about an 1/8 inch hole that we're doing here. And I'll show you why I'm using this drill bit in a second. So I'm going to drill a larger hole right in this hole. Whoop. We need electrons. All right. All right, there we go. We have power. So I'm using this new fancy electric Eastwood drill here that's really great. And I'm going to open up this hole here. So why did I open up the hole? When we're doing the TIG, it's really good to get if you've watched any other videos where I've done patch panels with the TIG welder, you notice that I get the panel to fit really, really nice, the patch panel, so there's almost no gap. It's like as close as it can be with no gap. Because of the welding process with TIG, it's better that way. So we're opening the hole up so that we can make a piece to fit in that hole. An 1/8 inch hole is really tough to make a piece to fit up in there. It's so small you end up dropping it and losing it. So I open it up to a larger hole. So what I do is we have our metal punch here. It's just a hand job one here that you can use. It works really well. Use it by yourself. And what this does is it has the interchangeable, there's a top and a bottom here. I have this adjusted already, so I'm not going to thread it out till we're done here. But there's a bottom piece that has a hole inside of it. And then the top die has a little pointer on it, and it's just a little smaller so it fits inside. What this does, it's like using a hole punch for paper. So I got a piece of 20 gauge here. It's the same thickness as what we're using. And I'm going to go right there. So we can push down, squeeze it in, punch it. And then they fall on the ground, and as long as you have a sort of clean shop for it, which we do, pull it off. So I got this little guy right there. Throw this under the bench. So what you have here, so I picked my drill bit size so that it is just a hair bigger than the hole that we're punching here. So there's a bunch of different size holes you can put in there. I believe that one's 1/4 inch that I have in there. So my drill bit size was just a hair bigger than that. So what happens is it puts a little dimple in the metal here, and you don't want to just leave that in there because if you'll have a raised area. So what you can do is take your body hammer on the table or on an anvil, do a couple quick little hits, and that's going to flatten it out nice, and it's going to take away that dimple real quick. So now we can go over to our panel here, and I can take a file. I'm going to flip it up. So in the video we worked on already, you can see the longer form one. We filled these all using the MIG, and then we did a couple with the TIG, which we're going to show you, and then we just did this one with the MIG. There's one that I opened up. So you can see the difference in the size of the hole. And I'm strictly doing that just so that we can make this little patch fit in the hole. So now's where I was talking about the copper backer. We're using it a little different. So I'm going to put the magnetic copper backer right underneath there. Actually, let me file this real quick. So we're going to file the hole just to get any of those little shavings kind of worked off there. All right. So we're using the copper backer more to hold our little piece so that if I drop it or while we're welding, it doesn't, for that split second before you get it welded in, it doesn't fall in. So it's a little bit loose here. So what we can do, you want a nice fit so it holds itself in. You can hit it once or twice and it'll actually stretch it by doing that just a little bit so that it'll hold itself in a little better. Whoop. All right, so I'm going to hit this one more time, or twice. So when I was filing it, I filed the hole just a hair larger. There we go. It's almost there. There we go. So when I'm hitting on the piece, what I'm doing is it was just a hair small so it wouldn't hold itself in. So by me hitting metal on metal like that, it's actually stretching the metal and making it just a tiny bit bigger so that it'll fit in there and be a nice tight fit into the piece. Just getting that to fit nice and tight. And what we can do, like I said, is you can use that copper backer just to kind of hold it in place so when you're pressing on it, you don't lose it. So I'll flip this around so Joe can get a shot here before we weld of the fitment. Is that okay? You want me to flip it up for you? Oh, there we go. So as you could see with Joe's amazing camera work, that I can't even see it, but I know it's awesome. There's going to be a great shot right now, live, of that piece that's fit in there. You can see there's no gap. So what I'm trying to do is basically fusion weld or use just a tiny bit of filler rod to work around that edge and melt that piece back in there. So that's why we used a drill bit that was just a tiny bit bigger than the hole punch that we're using in the metal. And I just tapped it around a little bit to get it to fit. What that does is it's going to require very, very low heat to melt the two of them together. And we're going to use almost no filler rod, so it's going to be a nice flat weld when we're done that requires very little grinding. Any questions, Scott, while I'm getting the welder set up here?
No, we're good right now.
Sweet.
They're saying which one would warp, one warp more than the other, and it really depends. As long as you keep, get in and get out, they're going to be almost identical warpage. So, whichever welder you have, don't feel like you necessarily need the other one unless you want to fabricate more with the digital TIG, but MIG is just as good for this. Yeah, MIG works well. It just takes a little more aggressive grinding. So with the TIG weld, we can hammer this weld flat and basically hit it with a DA sander almost and get it pretty darn good. With the grinder, you just have to be a little more careful because the weld's harder. You can't hammer on it too much, and you need to use like a flap disc to actually knock that down. So you have to be careful that you're not grinding
into your surrounding metal and thinning it out. So it's just a matter of the technique and the process. But I like for doing the TIG, it's a little more controlled. Once you get the technique down, it's more controlled, I should say. It takes a lot more practice to get a good weld and get set up. So now I have the TIG welder set up here on with the pulse feature and the 4T, which is all the fancy blinky gauges and contraption gadgets on this thing, which is awesome. So 4T, what this does, it allows me to hit the trigger. It's going to start the weld process. I'm going to hold it down, and then when I'm ready to weld, I let off of the trigger, and it's going to go up into my welding process. I have it set at 30 amps here, and then I have the pulse feature on, so it's going to drop down 60% of 30 amps, and then it's going to come back up I have the pulse set to every second. It's going to pulse, and then it's going to ramp down back to 10 amps, and then we're done. So I can do all this with the finger switch, which is really nice. I don't need the foot pedal here. And I dialed the machine in ahead of time so that it's kind of ready to go. So now the difference here is I'm actually going to start on the edge of the panel like we were saying we would not necessarily do with the MIG. But we're going to start right on the edge at that low 10 amps. And then as I start welding, I'm going to move my way around. Let me put my... All right. Really quick, you gotta be moving pretty quick, but what you can see is that the weld is really flat. So compared to the MIG weld, it's a little flatter, but that's the process if you guys want to start doing TIG welding with filling holes, if you're shaving holes. That's one of the ways to do it. You can fill it without using a filler piece, but you're going to put so much heat into the panel that you're going to end up causing more of a mess. So again, I can pull that copper backer off. That was also pulling some of the heat out of the panel to try and help from it blowing through. So now what I can do is I can take the hammer and dolly and hammer on that, and that thing's almost perfectly flat without even, see if I have something here to show you guys. Straight edge. So we're almost flat. Turn the switch on. So with no sanding, we have very minimal warpage there, and I didn't do any sanding or grinding yet. This MIG weld we did here, you know, you have to do some sanding, totally fine once you hit it with the flap disc and dress it up. But with the TIG welder, we're able to get it where there's almost no grinding. Again, it takes a lot more practice, but that's another way you guys can do it. Either one is perfectly acceptable. Just find the one that works for you. Any questions, Scott?
Oh, yes, there was one that I didn't hear you say, so I couldn't answer it. It was, what was the high amperage setting again when on the digital TIG?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I have the TIG set to a 30 amps max, and then I had the pulse set to 60%. So that means we're dropping down 60% of 30 amps on the on the downside. So whenever it pulsed off down, I'm moving my torch over and getting ready to melt it, to keep melting it. That also helps when you're doing thin sheet metal. It helps keep the heat out of the panel. So that split second that it's pulsing back and going to 20 amps. It's allowing the panel to just cool just a tiny bit to fight it wanting to blow through. So that's why it's really nice to have that pulse feature on the TIG, especially when you're doing intricate stuff like this. Any other ones?
Nope, we're good.
Awesome. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it as always. We'll have a full video showing this process and finishing out all these holes and showing the panel when it's all done. You'll catch it on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe. And as always, drop us a comment or leave us a message if you guys have any ideas for future Eastwood lives that you'd like to see us do certain types of tools, projects, or a technique or something that you've always been wanting to see, we'll do our best to do one of those for you live. So that's all I got, guys. Thanks. Catch you later.